Dr. Harry Haratunian, known by all of his patients as Dr. Harry, is an author and an internationally known speaker on addiction. Dr. Harry discusses breaking the stigma of addiction so that patients and families can get treatment and find recovery.
Lots of things have changed in the field of addiction over the years. The way that we diagnose it, the treatment, new medications. But one thing that hasn't changed at all is the stigma of addiction. And the stigma of addiction, unfortunately for the affected person, really has nothing to do with the fact that they have a disease. We don't stigmatize diabetics, we don't stigmatize people with multiple sclerosis, but we stigmatize people with this chronic organic disease of the brain because of stereotypical images that people have of the alcoholic. The stigma of addiction has got to end in order for people, both families and the affected individual, to access the treatment they deserve for a medical illness. We do that by treating both the family and the patient.
Dr. Harry defines addiction and outlines the many kinds of addiction.
I love to think of the root of the word addiction, which really means slavery. When someone is held hostage or is a slave to a substance, a person, or a process, and continue to use that substance, the person, or the process despite adverse consequences. They're unable to control it. There are addictions to alcohol. There are addictions to a variety of drugs. There are addictions to people called codependency and overdependence on people. There are process addictions, gambling, sex, food, compulsive buying, and now the internet games, video. You may walk down the street and see people who look like they're addicted to their cell phones. It's hard to see someone walking any longer without one in their hand. So continued use despite adverse consequences, usually loss of control and craving for that drug of choice, behavior of choice, usually defines what an addiction might be, and there are many.
Dr. Harry reveals his own struggle with addiction and how a person's genetics factor into substance abuse.
We know that addiction develops as a combination of pre-existing genetics and one's environment. I found that I was the only doctor in town at one time on call 24/7 for 13 years after a partner had taken his life. I was unable to say no to people who needed help. Part of the way that I was able to do that was to manipulate my sleep-wake cycle. So lots of caffeine or something else to help me stay awake, and alcohol to help me finally get to sleep at the end of the day was something that I had to do. It wasn't long after that I found that my relationship with alcohol was getting very much like what my father's and brother's was. And I ran into difficulty at that point, said my life was imbalanced, asked for help, and eventually got out here to the Betty Ford Center for treatment. My brothers were alcoholic, as was I, as am I. My father was an alcoholic, so my genetics was huge. Not everybody who has the genetics develops the disease, and not everybody without genetics can avoid the disease if the environment is abusive, if there's a previous head injury, if there's socioeconomic difficulties, if there's abuse and trauma in one's past. That kind of environment may easily lead someone to try substances. Today, we're looking at the horrors of an opiate crisis. I've seen far too many cases of people using heroin who started from a prescription for Vicodin or OxyContin when they fractured their arm at the age of 15 on a soccer field. And that started them on their road to difficulty.
The moment that an alcoholic or addict comes to the realization that they need help comes in many forms.
The DWI, the divorce papers, the violent outburst that hurts someone else, the child who hears the parents arguing and is frightened and found in their room crying. Those are all spiritual moments. They don't have to be bad experiences. Spiritual moments or moments of clarity can come when anyone exercises, with help oftentimes, that self-awareness that says, I'm simply not in balance in my life. I may have a bad relationship with drugs or alcohol. It doesn't make me a bad person, but I'm going to be open to looking at getting my balance back. If there's a problem, we'll discover it.